Ready.
Hi, this is Steve Hargadon and Audrey Waters. Hi, Audrey.
Hello.
So, a little bit of a quiet week this week.
Seemingly so. A couple of huge things, but pretty quiet on the Western Front.
I think we're going to have some fun talking about colored pills and the Kindle Fire.
Yes.
Um, Felt like a couple of the stories were kind of recycled from last week, and so we may not cover them fully.
Yeah.
Um, or not recycled, but were sort of additional information.
Yeah.
Um, but so I think we'll get going, and then the Kindle Fire will come up, and we'll have to decide how much time to take on it.
Okay.
Okay, so tell me what's the connection between college football and red and blue pills?
Well, the connection was that Saturday night I was in a hotel room in Denver flipping channels back and forth between the Matrix and the Stanford University of Oregon football game. Um, but I have been thinking a lot about sort of this particular moment that we are at, that we're facing in education, where there seem to be all sorts of crises and power plays and narratives about what's working and not working, and it's just struck me as this moment of crisis where we're going to have to make a decision about our future. So that's the very loose connection between between
so
those
I'm a
analogies.
Stan- so I'm a Stanford grad. Is there a connection there?
You're a Stanford grad?
I am.
I did not know that. Well, my master's degree is from U of O. So, but
So,
I'm not a fan of football, college
well, you and
football.
I share that. You and I share that then as well.
Yeah.
That's so funny, but that's a fun connection. Okay, so for me, this whole story of narratives is really interesting. I feel like we're seeing it play out in so many areas. And what really struck me this week is the inability to, for most of us, to see other people's narratives. This is especially true in sort of the Wall Street and Occupy Wall Street movements. It feels as though we just have a really hard time seeing another person's narrative, or even seeing evolving narratives. And is this sort of the key? Do we need to become better at this?
I think, I mean, I actually, Will Richardson wrote a really interesting response to a Wall Street Journal piece on that was really provocatively titled "My Teacher is an App," and it was fascinating because Will Richardson wrote a response, as did investor and author Tom Vander Ark, and it was fascinating to me to see these two folks approach and critique the Wall Street Journal article from totally different positions and have very different reads on the story. Both had sort of critiques of it, and it definitely feels as though we're having conversations that are not that sort of are they're almost like conversational misfires, and I'm not sure any of us are sort of making our points heard more broadly, or thinking through things critically, or recognizing the arguments that other people are making in the education space. I mean, and I think that it gets so politicized and caught up in buzzwords about who gets to own the notion of reform, who gets to own sort of the potential for tech, the potential for technology in the classroom and what that means. But it does feel as though that we aren't listening, sort of in general, in the education industry right now. We really aren't listening to each other, or to students, or to parents, or teachers. So
Well, I was intrigued by this idea that if we're kind of redefining education as learning how to learn, which is a definition I really like, that part of what we also need to be doing is telling narratives about narratives. Meaning, we need to be aware of this, in part not just because we're speaking past each other, but because we have to remember that sometimes people are so enmeshed in a narrative that they're not consciously trying to be the bad guy, but their whole worldview is around a certain way of thinking that they just don't see the other way.
well, and I think that's. I mean, when I wrote the blue pill or the red pill story, and was thinking about, I really wasn't thinking about college football in terms of the Stanford Oregon game. I was really thinking about Penn State, obviously, and I think that that's a good example of that, in which the university's identity and the narratives that that school tells about why Penn State has become a great university is a narrative that is intertwined with college football, intertwined with the story of Joe Paterno, and just thinking about what that looked like when the scandal broke in terms of students rioting, and I think was a sort of a horrific example of what happens when these other narratives go not I don't mean unchallenged in terms of criticizing college sports, but I think unchallenged in terms of not thinking through what exactly we're telling ourselves.
Yeah, for me, the big story here is that institutional narratives that depend on compliance are breaking.
Yes.
And there's going to be pain as they break. Okay, so what is FERPA, and why is it so darn old, and why is it in the news this week?
Well, there is a trio of laws that sort of generally invoked when you're talking about children and students and online activities. So COPPA, SIPA, and FERPA. And FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and it dates all the way back to 1974. It is an old law, and I think as our notions of privacy are changing and our notions of sharing educational content are changing, FERPA looks really out of whack. And it's in the news this week because Georgia Tech, which is actually the first school who used wikis as part of its curriculum, the school decided to actually shutter all of the wikis. They invoked FERPA. They said that having a wiki was a violation of a student's right to privacy. And even though the school has had wikis for over 20 years now, they removed all the students from them. It's really a devastating blow to thinking about the potential for what the internet can do to teaching and learning. As someone said when I tweeted this story, they said Georgia Tech's lawyers ruin pedagogy, and so I think that's a fairly accurate assessment here. Is the law trumped teaching and learning.
So Georgia Tech is no newbie in this area. I think you said 20 years, but I think you meant to say 10 because I think it was 1999.
Yeah,
but that's still so long,
right?
To have been using wikis. I mean, they had to have been really early adopters.
They were early adopters. And what's fascinating about the Georgia Tech wiki system is that they, rather than creating a new wiki for each class, they created wikis for the class in general. So if you took Intro to Biology wiki has been sort of going on, and if you took the class, you could join the wiki, you could stay in the wiki even after you completed the course. And that's actually where apparently the FERPA violation was supposed to occur, is this notion that students, you're not supposed to have access to sort of records of what classes students are in. And so by virtue of having students in wikis is sort of available to the other student population, what other students are learning.
Right. Well, the idea was
I articulate it and I laugh. It's so silly.
Right. Well, the idea was you can't post student grades. You're not supposed to know what classes other students are in, and that really came down to that, right? It was, right. Well, if somebody's in the wiki, then you know what class they're in. Oh, we can't do that.
Right.
But here was what really bothered me about this story, and it came on the heels of an experience I had this week where I had been part of a group blog where several of us had kind of carried the blog for the last 2 or 3 years doing all the posting. And the educational organization that had started the blog, decided to sell or transfer the blog to another organization without contacting us, and actually, I don't know if it was intentional or not, completely closed down the blog and deleted all the content off the web. Now, they've sort of backpedaled and they're helping us to get the content back online, but it felt very much like maybe not a legal violation, but a violation. That was our content. We posted it. We did it in the, under the assumption that this was a group effort, and nobody even contacted. In fact, we had asked several times during the last 2 or 3 years when it was clear the institution didn't have any interest in the project anymore. We'd said, "Can we take it over?" And got no response. But for them then to transfer it to somebody else, it felt like a violation. And I thought in this story, all of that student content and work
Yeah.
was wiped out. Now, I understand the privacy issue, but it felt to me like that was a violation of the um, of who had created the content.
Absolutely, and I think and much like in your example, the it's certainly my understanding that none of the faculty at Georgia Tech sort of had word that this was coming. I mean, this is sort of like you wake up one day and log in to your wiki and it's gone. This wasn't something that the faculty had any sort of got to, or certainly it doesn't appear as though the faculty had any notion that this was coming down the pipe, that this was something that was discussed with them. This was a legal decision that I think exactly that. And I think that, all of this, we spend a lot of time talking about the potential for tools like wikis and blogs to really to provide some new and exciting opportunities for students to be able to work together, share their work publicly too, so that it's not just a matter of why did you write this paper? Well, you wrote this paper so that your professor could read it, and that's really the audience of one. This notion that students are actually learning to be to learning to learn openly, to write publicly, to engage with one another in the learning process is really something that's powerful and afforded by these technologies. And to see FERPA invoked as a reason to shut that down, I think is a devastating blow to all sorts of endeavors that the educators are engaged in right now.
So on the surface of it, it may just be an anomaly. It could just be, a mistaken activity. It's sort of like the Missouri Facebook law.
Right.
This is going to get settled and solved, and there will be cultural dialogue around it, and that's all good and well. It felt to me like the hidden danger was there something going on there that's actually larger and going to impact other institutions? Was there government contact? Was there some kind of a legal situation that precipitated this that we don't know about yet? And our hope, I guess, would be that no, this was just a bad decision.
Yeah, and I think that's the concern as well. And going back to the other two laws, COPPA and SIPA, I think that the letter of the law in all of these cases sort of leads sort of. I think that the way in which these laws are interpreted oftentimes is far more restrictive than I think the letter of the law actually reads. And so I think that that's also this fear, is that if schools see a major institution making this move and invoking FERPA, anyone who's a little bit nervous about their students posting their work online in a blog or in a wiki now has sort of precedent to point to Georgia Tech and say, see, their lawyers agreed that this is a dangerous or illegal act, and so we better not be supportive of these efforts in the future.
Right. And so just in the same way as the Penn State issue has precipitated a lot of other organizations really looking at what's happened in their organization, and sometimes now bringing things to light voluntarily in order to avoid the same kind of a problem. I guess the question would be, are all the higher ed institutions now looking at their collaborative tools in light of FERPA, and will we see other activity because of that?
And I think, and the other thing is that is, I think, pretty damaging about this is that if the problem is having things posted sort of publicly, this is also the sort of thing that's going to drive people into sort of walled garden approaches, right? So instead of being able to post things on a blog which anyone can read, all of your students' content will be restricted by course and behind, in some sort of it could still be online, but it's not going to be available sort of publicly, or students won't be able to collaborate across classes or throughout time. And I think that it's a move to private, closed, walled gardens online, which again I think is counter to a lot of the movement that we've seen towards getting students to sort of have their content available for the general public.
So the conspiracy theorist will go crazy if it turns out that some commercial
Yes,
educational company or publisher has actually precipitated this, right?
indeed.
Yeah, that was. I mean, that's so far fetched, but we'll deal with that when it comes. Okay, so I'm still really wondering about this badge competition. Maybe it's the complexity of it, or in some ways the too close parallel with existing assessment.
Hmm.
But I'm still just unsure about this whole open badges project, and especially the competition.
Yeah, it's been interesting to sort of watch the reactions to the people thinking through what does it mean to offer badges rather than, or in addition to perhaps traditional certification methods. I think I'm excited about the possibility. I think that looking through the submissions for this first round of the digital media and learning competitions call for badges for lifelong learning. It was really interesting to see the ones that were that were there was a sort of range. There was a range of proposals for different kinds of badges, and some seemed like very much a company's brand. Like, so you can get you can get a badge that says that you're a pro at a particular piece of software, which isn't exciting to me. But I think that there are ways to recognize other activities that are happening online that do seem interesting, and it's a way to hold conversations about assessment that I think are going to be fruitful, even if this project doesn't move forward. Thinking about what is it, what really are we talking about when we give someone a piece of paper that says, you have been, you've moved through these steps, and we now think that you are a Bachelor of Arts or a Master of Science.
This story's not going to go away, and you're going to have to keep convincing me of this. But I feel very much the same way I feel about electronic portfolios.
Mm-hmm.
That the more that people try and organize them, the less excited I get because of the feeling I have that it's really important for students to be engaged in creating their own portfolios. So I see the badging system as being this sort of complex, convoluted system that everybody's going to have to figure out and comply with that may in fact sort of hide the value of individuals asserting their own value.
No, and I think that that's actually really important, and I would argue that, I mean, I would certainly never make the trade-off between either having a badge or having my own personal blog, for example. I would much rather have a blog and let my work speak for itself there than have some sort of digital button that said I get the badge for ed tech writing. So I do think that it's important for people to sort of be able to showcase their own skills, and truly own that space. But I do still think that this project is coming at a time where we're asking a lot of serious questions about what is a degree worth, what's a major worth, like what is a chemistry major or a theater arts major sort of worth anything. So I think that there are a lot of forces coming into play that are making us rethink how are we going to recognize the sort of new skill sets that don't have a traditional institution or traditional sort of piece of paper behind them.
I'm totally laughing here, and we're gonna segue into your weekly roundup because what I'm wondering is what will the difference be between the badge for the business student and the engineering student based on their
Yes.
study skills? Is one going to be slightly tarnished or faded?
Well, that
We'll get
that's
there.
that study actually that study made me chuckle, considering all of the hoopla you hear about the problems with sort of liberal arts and humanity, like the humanities degree is somehow a wasted degree. On behalf of people with multiple humanities degrees, I had to point and say, "Look, the real problem are those business majors. When someone needs to do something about business majors."
Well, and there's another story about the value of the degree and the dollar amount of earnings. That has to be done at the same time. Again, we're quantifying
Yes.
learning based on financial outcome.
And I hate that.
When a lot of us went to college, understanding that part of it was to help us become better citizens and better people, and
Yeah.
that's not really quantifiable.
I mean, and I have these, I have these recollections when I taught at the University of Oregon, sort of offering sort of, the sort of academic counseling role that you do as a teacher, and telling sort of smart students who could write well, sort of, as they thought through what their major should be, and steering people, for example, into philosophy degrees, into history degrees, not at all based on sort of their earning potential down, with a piece of paper that says I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, but because it was going to be an exercise in deep thinking, or sort of strenuous research, or an opportunity to sort of write well. And I think that basing things on sort of this potential for whatever your future earnings are is definitely not something that I'm comfortable with in thinking about the value of learning.
Well, again, there's the narrative shift, and hopefully we're going to see that happen. Okay, so I'm going to give the award for best quotes of the week to your Boost STEM Education blog post.
I was blown
So
away. Yes.
you go to Lego's Education STEM Summit, and what do you hear?
Well, you know, I was I was really shocked because I feel like as someone who spends a lot of time, talking to educators and hearing the pushback among teachers, and even sort of seeing it in students that I know, the pushback against standardized testing and the sort of this burden of high stakes testing on teachers and students. But to actually be at a conference where I heard a CEO of a company speak out against standardized testing was pretty shocking to me. And now, granted, this was from Pittsco, who definitely, as a company, does have sort of skin in the game, if you will, in because Pittsco isn't selling standardized tests; they're selling hands-on sort of materials to experiment and build things with your hands. But when the CEO of Pittsco, who incidentally was a former shop teacher, which I didn't realize, said that pointed to the rise of standardized testing as something that leads to the decline in tech programs, and in shop classes, and actually in laboratory experimentation in school. It actually made me very happy to hear someone in that position speak out against the sort of high stakes testing, and he was really very, very critical of this move towards more testing, less hands on experimentation, and that was the tenor with
Okay, here are my
everyone I talked to.
the four-letter word that starts and ends with a T,
Yes.
right? And then this one was really stopped me when I was reading it. Standardized test scores aren't necessarily the symptom; they might just be the disease. I think that's from you,
Yeah,
right?
that is me. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to tell you that I'm going to be quoting that somewhere. I'm pretty sure. And then we haven't ever talked about this, but you've led me to believe that we may actually agree in another area. You said it's about convincing parents to let go of their hand-wringing and accept play back into their children's lives.
Right.
Boy, we could spend some time on that at some point.
Well, that was the interesting thing. There were Lego assembled several education technology bloggers, and we held a little round table before the day started. And it was Dave Banks, who writes for Wired's Geek Dad. Now I can't remember the names. Ben Rhymes, who has a blog called Tech Savvy Educator, and someone who writes for Edgetopia, and myself, and listening to educators and parents talk about the pressures on their students, or excuse me, pressures on their students and children, and the pressure from other parents on teachers to sort of not do, sort of like, if you're playing with Legos in the classroom, why aren't you preparing my children better for standardized testing? And to me, that that's a sad piece too, that that we would have parents actually be advocates for more testing in the classroom rather than recognizing how the things that you can do with Legos, even just a very simple Lego set, are astounding in terms of thinking about problem solving, thinking about math, thinking about engineering, thinking about creativity, and why we would ever want to squelch that in terms of a skilled multiple choice form filler outer is beyond me.
So we had a really brilliant session in this week's Global Education Conference from Jarmo Vitelli, who's in Finland and runs the Finnish EdTech Conference. And, of course, really no standardized testing until the very end of your schooling there, which is in and of itself lots to think about. But also, he gave us the statistic that I did not know, that in terms of they have teachers in one of those tests, the teachers measure the amount of time they have to spend getting their kids to be quiet in class.
Mm-hmm.
And Finland scores very poorly on this, right? So he was sort of using this as an example of Finland's not always in the highest category. But as the discussion ensued, we kind of agreed that maybe a part of the reason they have trouble getting students to be quiet in class is because they're so engaged.
Yes.
And that this is a part of that sort of compliance narrative that we expect quiet obedience, when in
Right.
fact, a country that's doing very, very well, the kids are actively engaged and so engaged that sometimes it's hard for the teacher to bring them back quietly.
That's actually really interesting. I mean, and I think that's part of the fear, this sort of new fear, I think, of stepping away from the sort of the high stakes testing model, and encouraging more play and experimentation and hands-on learning opportunities in the classroom. It is wild and messy, and that's not necessarily a behave. That's not necessarily sort of behavior or disruptive behavior. That's actually a productive thing. But I think that all of these things that are getting students trained to be silent, heads down, pencil scribbling workers is probably that's not necessarily the sort of space that's going to have people become creators, makers, and builders and thinkers.
I'm thinking of the pictures I've seen of the inside of Zappos.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a quiet, compliant culture. Do you?
right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so my favorite story, the Kindle Fire. So this is
Yeah.
from your Inside a High Red blog post. Okay, so personally, I get all of the drawbacks, right? And we'll dive a little bit deeply here. But it seems to me that the price point and the book content are providing Amazon with a huge opportunity, especially in K-12, and I don't see them taking advantage of it. It's like, oh, they're
Yeah.
so close, and they don't. It's not happening.
I was, when the Kindle Fire was announced, I mean, I'm always really reluctant to sort of label any new device, particularly to sight unseen, as like revolutionary. This changes everything. And there were a couple of stories after Amazon announced their tablet that said just that the price point is going to be so great that schools are not going to be able to say no, and the Kindle Fire will sort of be the new one-to-one learning device. And I'm skeptical of that for a lot of reasons. But when I actually held the device in my hand and I immediately went to the App Store and saw that there were no educational apps. And there's for all of the reasons that we've talked about before, why students are reluctant to use digital textbooks, that those problems are like compounded 1,000-fold. That's sort of exaggerating, but they're compounded like threefold on
Well,
the
especially for higher ed, they are.
right, right. That I just thought, wow, what a missed opportunity, what a actual, really a missed opportunity for Amazon, which I understand is making a consumer play here, and I think that the Kindle Fire will probably be pretty successful. But I was actually sort of surprised to see that they weren't even sort of not even trying to make this into an educational device.
Interestingly, for me, because I received one as well. And I went to the UPS guy who delivered it and said, "How many of these have you delivered today?" And he didn't even know what it was. And I thought, well, that's anecdotal, but he's not delivering a dozen in our neighborhood. But interestingly for me, by being more than a Kindle, it almost felt like less.
Yes.
So let me describe that. I think the packaging was brilliant. It's minimalist. It's an integrated system. I love my Google Android tablet because it's so tightly integrated with Google. And if I weren't so tightly integrated with Google, I would probably love the Kindle Fire even more because it's so tightly integrated with Amazon. But it obviously doesn't have the wow factor,
right?
Like the iPad. Kids are not going to say, "Wow, I got to see your Kindle Fire." But it does seem like if they would focus on the book aspect, right, and if they would focus on the ability to have lots of public domain content and just make it a really good device. This is a device I would be very comfortable buying for my child. It feels very safe. It's not the wild, wild west. They're not going to download all kinds of stuff. What's bad for me, the App Store that's tied to Amazon, as a parent, is actually really good. So I would be really ready to buy this for my kid, but I want them to focus on the books for education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that, earlier this fall I got rid of my iPad because really all I was using it for was really as a very like a $600 Kindle, and I thought I'm just gonna wait. I'm gonna get a Kindle, and sort of my first. My first sort of day's experience with it, I really wish I'd actually just bought a Kindle, because I don't actually feel as though there's anything with the Kindle Fire that is going to make me that makes me excited about the device. And I say this as admittedly, I'm an Amazon customer. I buy my ebooks there. I do buy my music there, but it felt really lacking in terms of even the potential as a reading device, and particularly when you think of a reading device for educational content. It's a smaller size screen, so I can't imagine how we're going to translate sort of the textbook content to that smaller screen.
Well, for me, it wasn't about textbooks, and I read on my phone, and I'm very comfortable with the small size of my phone. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking, Amazon, hire me. Come on. Let's run with this. This could be so huge. A $200 device that you could have 300 books on it, and you don't have to buy Shakespeare's collection, and all of the great books. Just a delightful opportunity. But it felt to me like they missed it.
Yeah, yeah. The UI, the UI is weird. The sort of the opening screen, it's sort of got a bookshelf, but yet then it's sort of your recently opened apps, and when it doesn't render web pages very well, it actually renders web pages as a in their format that they would if you looked at them on your phone, for example. So you've got a little bit bigger screen, but it's not quite big enough to enjoy a website. So it's a very strange device. At first I was thinking that a lot of the tech reviewers were just being overly critical tech reviewers, which is something I think we like to do. But having played around with it, I am pretty disappointed, and I think you're right that this is a missed opportunity for Amazon to really put a stake in the ground for being the distributor of all sorts of content, book content, media content, and this educational market for precisely that is only going to grow.
This is the first iteration. I'm going to give them props for what I felt was a pretty good unified experience. If it wasn't such a Google nut, or those of you those who are Apple nuts. For somebody who's not very highly technical and who likes Amazon books, it's a nice unified experience. But I will say the browser was a huge disappointment to me. After all their talk about the browser, there's so much screen space that's wasted
Yeah.
from the header and the footer. You can barely see the website in landscape. And I thought, I would not use this for browsing the web.
Well, I was last weekend. I went and visited my dad, who just purchased his an iPad, and my dad is not at all a technical person, but putting an iPad in his hands was incredible. I mean, he feels so empowered now to sort of do things that he never would have done with a regular desktop computer. And I actually don't know if I could have handed him the Kindle Fire and that he would have navigated it with the same ease of use. I'm not sure if it's actually that easy of a device to handle. And I say this, of course, totally implicated. I mean, I have played with an iPad, and I am, I mean, my standards are pretty high, but there's something about an iPad that is incredibly simple for toddlers you know, the elderly to use. And I just don't know if the Kindle Fire is actually that. It doesn't seem that intuitive. Like I sort of struggle to find, like, where are my apps, what's on the device, what's in the cloud, where do I find where do I find the email app? It just wasn't
Right.
obvious to me.
And I don't think they're not really focused on that. I think they're focused on their content being in a
Yes.
single unified place. I'll say for me, another sort of major flaw in this version is that even though Audible is brilliantly a part of this, and I'm an Audible user, uh, what Audible shows is the limitations on the video. Like
Yes.
I watch video through Amazon. I really like it. I have a Roku device and I watch it, and I'll watch it on the Kindle Fire. But the fact that you have to be hooked up to wireless to do so
Yeah.
means that you can't download a movie and watch it when you're in a car or on an airplane,
Right.
and that's what Audible does so brilliantly. So it was almost like the use of Audible on the device showed me how weak the video was for me at this stage.
Yeah, that was another one of the things that I was thinking about as well. And actually, in Amazon's defense, I think this is something that this move now to streaming technology, which is everyone sort of is getting on board with the streaming and the subscription model. I mean, I just recently updated to Apple's new iTunes Match to sort of stream content from your device. And I had that realization now too, which is, oh, when like, if I don't actually have my favorite songs on my iPhone, when I'm on an airplane, I have no music. I have no music to listen to. And so I think that this sort of rush to excitement with streaming content, we until we have sort of a ubiquitous Wi-Fi, it's actually not that awesome.
So I'm gonna use this to segue to where I think Google hit a home run this week.
All right.
Because we've bashed Google a little, but it's actually with Google Music,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if you've played with it yet, but it's a cloud-based service that lets you upload your music, and then it can be streamed from any device. But it also lets you download that content to the device. You can download your playlists. If you update a song and add it to a playlist on your phone, it's updated in the cloud, so every device sees that playlist, and you can actually say, "I want to have access to this playlist on my phone," so it will automatically download. And I think they have done a brilliant job. And we've talked about the difference between sort of Google and Facebook and Apple,
Mm-hmm.
right, in terms of understanding social, and also understanding the integrated user experience. And I was intrigued to see a place where I thought Google did a really good job of bringing both together. A really good user experience with the social piece, because Google Plus is integrated, in a way that I felt like kind of redeemed Google a little in my eyes.
Oh, that's good. I actually haven't had a chance to play around with the Google Music yet, but I do think that this echoes some of the things I think that Google learned with the Chromebook, which was their web-based operating system. Is that if we're going to have something that relies on if you're going to rely on a system that is web-based, you have to have the infrastructure in place to support offline usage. And I think that was an early snafu with the Chromebooks, was that they're great right up until you have no internet connection. And so hopefully I think Google's been thinking about in a lot of ways, and they've started offering sort of offline Gmail, offline Google Docs. That as much of our world is sort of using Google tools, we actually have to be able to access them, so, not in their full functionality, but in some functionality when we don't have an internet connection.
I'll be interested to see what you think of Google Music. As an Amazon Music purchaser, you're probably going to love it because you can directly upload your music right to Google's cloud. And I think exactly as you said, I think they've done a really nice job here, and I needed to give them some props having been so critical. Okay, so we're into the weekly roundup.
Yes.
What is the Children's App Manifesto?
Well, this is a really interesting thing that I think is something that when I talk to a lot of education technology startups, a lot of them are sort of really trying to think through their business model, which is sort of how can we make our product affordable, but how can we maintain a high quality educational content? And I think that particularly when you have a team that is full of researchers, full of R&D specialists, people who are doing really innovative things, giving it away for free, that's not sustainable. And this model in which all apps sort of are approaching 99 cents, that's not really sustainable either. You have to sell a lot of apps at 99 cents to be able to support, even a small development shop with, five employees. And so Andy Russell, who's the co-founder of Launchpad Toys, and who gets the distinction of being the only education technology company I've spoken with that was able to hold a smart conversation about Seymour Papert. So he gets kudos for that. But and Daniel Donahue, who's a researcher and writes for Wired's Geek Dad, they wrote an app, the Children's App Manifesto, which is really a call for educators and parents and app developers and marketers and investors to think critically about how are we going to make sure that we are making this content high quality, and that the companies that are making high quality content can be sustainable. And I think it's actually it's a really important thing to think through, especially when we think about some of the large players in the game who can make apps and get away with selling them for free or 99 cents because they have this whole other branding mechanism behind them. And there's a lot of great content, but there's also a lot of really sort of exploitative content for kids. And I think that I really liked this is a very thoughtful manifesto on how can we make sure that kids aren't being exploited, and parents can actually afford to buy a $1 app and check it out and see if it's useful or not useful or enjoyable or not enjoyable, and that but folks can still sort of earn a living building great content for kids.
Good. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, so now Microsoft's Live at EDU platform with 22 million users. What does this platform actually do?
So this is marketing spin. This is Microsoft has sort of to the cloud, I believe, as Steve Ballmer said a couple of years ago. This is their cloud-based hosted email and collaboration suite. So it's their Office, Microsoft Office in the cloud. This is the service that they're offering K through 12 schools and universities. It's the Microsoft equivalent in some respects to Google Apps for education. And those two companies, Google and Microsoft, they like to trade press releases where one will say, just today Google said, I believe, University of California at Santa Cruz went Google, and then you'll hear a press release from Microsoft saying, X, Y, or Z, the Portland public school system went Microsoft. And so Microsoft released their press statement this week that they have 22 million users, which makes them the largest the largest sort of cloud-based educational platform in the world. So
is calling it an educational platform? Is there something I'm missing here? And I guess Google Apps for Education, I kind of accept that because there's a strong collaborative component to it. Mm-hmm. But it feels to me like this is just the productivity suite, right? Or is there more? Am I missing that there's more?
I think that they are, I think that they are really struggling to catch up with Google in terms of thinking through collaboration. I don't think that Microsoft is sort of that ilk, if you will. They have added some collaboration features. I mean, you can sort of share documents, but it's definitely not the same sort of. It's definitely not the same. What would you even call it? It's definitely not the same sort of collaborative projects like sites or even the way in which Google Docs allows for multiple simultaneous editing. It's not the same. And I think that in some ways this is a bit of a red herring because when Microsoft says they have 22 million users of its cloud-based platform, I mean many schools have long used Microsoft Exchange have hosted things locally, have used Microsoft locally. So, I think for them to sort of move to the cloud it's not as though folks have sort of suddenly made the switch to Microsoft. These are long-standing Microsoft customers who've just opted for a cloud-based rather than a locally run solution.
Interesting. Okay, so speaking of dubious badges, I'm the co-sponsor of the EduBlog Awards. So so nominations are now open. Now the reason I say that is because the voting system here is imprecise, and in fact in many ways it's a popularity contest, and I know because some of my efforts have won several awards. So part of the fun of the EduBlog Awards is just becoming aware of all the people doing good things, and it
Yes.
should be recognized that the award winners are not necessarily, this is not a scientific process. There is voting involved, but it's just a really fun event, and it's a great way to showcase the good work lots of people are doing, and hopefully nobody walks away feeling badly if they didn't win.
No, I think
But
that
again, so,
that's actually one of the things I love most about the EduBlog Awards is it's an opportunity to sort of find new blogs that just for whatever reason haven't been on my radar before. And I think that some we do see some names who win every year, and almost in some ways rightly so. I think of the work that Richard Byrne does, for example, in free technology for teachers. I mean he that's a really great website with a ton of resources. But it's also, I think the awards are also an opportunity to sort of find new blogs that you've not ever heard about before that get nominated. And so I love sort of clicking through and finding all sorts of exciting work that folks are doing that just hasn't, for whatever reason, I haven't found before.
good. Well, we love it, and so the nominations are now open. Okay, so in another shocking story, it turns out that Rate My Professor's ratings are actually somewhat accurate.
This
I'm,
one
I'm stunned.
this one is funny. I am not a fan. Having sort of was teaching at the time when RateMyProfessors.com sort of came into existence. I always found it to be awful. But then again, the whole sort of student evaluation process is also sort of awful. And so, but the research this week found that actually the sort of comments that students leave on RateMyProfessors.com actually is pretty close to the sorts of things that they write and leave in their sort of pencil and paper formal evaluations. So,
So they're
make of that what
accurate.
you will.
So they're accurate in the same way that those evaluations are reflective of the student's perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that when I look at reviews of a restaurant,
Yes.
I not only am evaluating the restaurant, but I have to evaluate the individual reviews
Yes.
because I know that they're written by people of widely diverging capabilities.
Well, I think that this was always the sense with that some people had with Rate My Professors, and honestly, the same could be said about any sort of student evaluation as well. That it tends to be the students who either completely loved you and thought that you were the greatest teacher that they've ever had, and that you should make a lot of money, which was my favorite student evaluation that I ever got. Was that someone should make sure Audrey makes a lot of money, which I saved as a graduate student making, living below the poverty line. But or students were motivated by a great love or an absolute hatred of you. And so in some ways they weren't really representative of whether or not a teacher was sort of a good teacher, or that folks enjoyed their material. So, but I think that students feel like leaving those comments on their on their formal evaluations as well.
Yeah, and as a public, we're becoming better at understanding how to manage that kind of public information,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's Amazon or a restaurant review or a review of a professor.
Yep.
Okay, so I want to kind of end with a little bit of a gripe.
Okay.
And it's not related to you, but so this past week we ran the Global Education Conference, and for the last 2 years, we have run what is really an innovative, sort of stunning event, worldwide event, virtual and for thousands of educators around the world to come and share their practices, specifically on global education. And for the last 2 years, we've contacted the State Department because they run something at this time called the International Education Week, and we get literally no real play or feedback or promotion. And I'm intrigued by the degree to which a grassroots, really authentic, innovative activity like this that completely matches. In fact, we picked the dates to match with International Education Week because it's such a great match that we don't get really kind of any recognition. And it was a reminder to me, again, of sort of how far it feels that some of these government educational activities are, how far removed they are from the actual authentic work. That's my rant.
Well, I mean, and I think that that's one of the things that strikes me, even looking at some of the sort of the announcements and news this week out of DC, the things that, and I don't know if folks tuned into Arnie Duncan's, had his Twitter town hall, and it just always sort of strikes me as a lot of educators, particularly sort of on the leading edge of technology adoption, we are so far ahead of and having such sort of nuanced and smart conversations, while I'm just not sure that the Department of Education is even prepared to handle this at all, which is a shame.
Well, we had a blast. Anyway, the plug will be all of the recordings are up online at globaleducationconference.com. And it was a terrific event. And Audrey, again, another really fun week of news. Always delightful to talk to you.
Likewise.
Take care, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.